Hello, team. Welcome back. We are going to keep our conversation going in terms of civil rights. So we are going to be picking up with one of the files from yesterday, the one where you started off by looking at kind of icons, as we refer to it, like Rosa Parks, Little Rock Nine. We'll still be using the back end of that page to understand some groups of the movement. And then we also have some questions to help guide you through a few uh, primary sources, a few quotes from these two titans of the era, Martin Luther King Jr. and Malcolm X. So let's first go into some of the groups, like we had mentioned, socially and legally, things kind of have to work in tandem to create real change. And we had seen this in terms of maybe socially, like sit-ins, freedom rides. We saw this more legally in terms of like the Civil Rights Act of 1964, Voting Rights Act of 1965. But there's a very diverse group of how would you say different kind of advocates in the civil rights era. And we're going to talk about three in particular. The first one we're going to talk about is the SCLC. This one's most famous for having Martin Luther King involved, and they are big with social demonstrations to advocate for change. You can kind of see that here in this poster, March on Washington. They are big advocates of non-violent protests. That's very visible, if you will. And it's remarkable how they're able to keep that stance of nonviolence in the face of such violence. This is a famous photo of what I'm describing here. You have protesters here completely nonviolent, but incredibly strong, right? They're not backing down. They're keeping their strength even in the face of such violence. This is a powerful way to create change because it's definitely showing how committed you are to a movement and also starts to make people in America open their eyes. Who do they really have more in common with here, right? Other groups, though, approached the civil rights movement rather differently. For one, the Black Panthers here. Now, they were visually very different. I mean, you see the image here, much almost. I'm hesitant to say use the word militant, but they are definitely more not bold, but a little more radical in their methods for change. Oftentimes, they get painted with a brush of being a violent group, which isn't fair. They're definitely advocates for self-defense and force when needed, but definitely trying to promote social change, much like other groups. When we talk about that use of force when needed, though, this is a great photo that shows that they started to really advocate for self-defense, arming through legal possession of firearms, which definitely worried and scared quite a few Americans here. They had a pretty interesting list of demands, and this is a 10 kind of bullet pointed list of Black Panther demands, and some of them are very kind of exact, right? It's very clear what they want. All black men to be exempt from military service, for instance. Others are a little broader, right? What does decent housing mean? Full employment. So, I mean, when you're talking about change, it doesn't come much bigger than this, right? Besides land possession, freedom from jail. These are the big ideas. Unfortunately, their leadership was oftentimes targeted, jailed, and even sometimes, frankly, assassinated, killed in Chicago. Fred Hampton, a very young, charismatic leader of the movement, was killed early in the morning in his own home. A third group, though, is the NAACP. Now, this is a group that pushed for change through more legal means, in the law, if you will. So they're still around today. They would be big advocates of voter registration drives, trying to use your voice in a legal sense. Now, that's not to say they weren't demonstrators or risking their lives, absolutely, but that was more of the idea there. So, if you're talking about the civil rights movement, which we are, you got to definitely mention these two individuals. We got Martin Luther King Jr. on the left, Malcolm X on the right. as we'll see, very different in their approaches, but both would inspire countless individuals to get involved. So I attached a document. You only need the first page of that document, but it has some questions to help you understand these quotes as we go through. Our first one will be from Martin Luther King. It's the "Our God is Marching On" speech. I'll give you a second here to read it. All right. Whenever you're done reading it, you can pause it, the video, if you want to read it, and then unpause it once you've read it. Now, there's such a strength here, right? That nothing will get in their way. Not churches, not homes being attacked. And what is the goal here, right? To attack segregation, in particular schools. This last phrase is amazing. The socially healing context of the classroom. Now, I like to think that we learn so much more than just content in school. We learn so much about who we are as people, how we operate as individuals in society. King's making it very clear that it is a cornerstone of the movement to have segregation lifted, to have African American white children together. That's how you'll learn. Now, unfortunately, this is not just vague language here as far as churches and homes being attacked. He's actually referencing the 16th Street Baptist Church bombing, where 4 young children having a choir rehearsal actually killed by a white supremacist bomb. So let's look at the flip side here. Let's take a look at Malcolm X from the Organization of Afro-American Unity. So you can pause the video and read it. Once you've read it, unpause it, and I'll talk about it. Okay. So he's doing very different things here. So I don't see bringing down segregation anywhere. We're still talking about school, though. But very, very different mindset. He's talking about original educational methods that Afro-Americans, African Americans, themselves establish. Now, I'm not implying that he's in favor of segregation, but his solution to our problem in schools isn't necessarily just blending, but it's actually letting African Americans take charge of their own institutions and be able to kind of lead their own education. So, a very different mindset there. In terms of methods, though, how we can make this change, these next 2 documents will dive in deep. So, you can pause the video here, you can read through Martin Luther King's staff retreat speech, and then unpause it when you're ready, and we can talk about it. This is such a great document of nonviolence, and let's never confuse nonviolence for weakness. This is incredibly strong, but he just points out the failure of violence. It doesn't murder. Like, killing someone doesn't end all killing. In fact, he actually argues that it just increases hate. If we are to move forward as a society, right, violence can't be the avenue we take. It's going to just lead us into darker times. Well, does Malcolm X agree? This is an interview he gave in the Young Socialist, so you can pause the video, read it. When you're ready, unpause it. I always key in on this phrase, I'm also a realist. A realist is someone who just lives in the world that the way it is, right? They're not a dreamer. They're acting as society dictates they must. And to him, nonviolence is a dream, right? The opposition, the enemy, as he puts it, isn't using nonviolence. And it makes only sense that you should protect yourself, that in the face of violence, violence can be used. Now, he's not saying it's the first move you go to, but it should be used. Now, very, very different interpretations here. And the movement is by no means unified in any one particular way. We see followers for both men. Watts in 1965 is a great example of when nonviolence isn't quite enough to overcome a situation. This actually is a 6-day riot in Los Angeles, 34 dead, 3,000 arrests. Later that year, actually, Malcolm X would be assassinated and killed. And speaking of leaders being tragically taken, here is a amazing speech. It's given by Robert Kennedy, the brother of John F. Kennedy. He's running for president at this time, and he's been given the news that Martin Luther King Jr. has been assassinated. So his job is to break the news to people, and the way he does that's very powerful. So if you want to open up the Power or the Google slide itself, you can hit play and watch the video, and once you've done that, you can come back here. So powerful speech, and he pleads for people to kind of live on the way King did, right? Through continued strength and protest, but not violently. But as it showed you, tragically, Kennedy was also assassinated shortly after, just like his brother. When we talk about maybe the stalling of the civil rights movement, it's hard to imagine a movement continuing with so much of its leadership being stricken away, right? You saw leaders of the Black Panthers killed. You saw Malcolm X killed, Martin Luther King Jr. killed, Robert Kennedy killed. And this will lead us into a very turbulent time of the 60s and the Vietnam War, which we'll be starting to talk about next week. We do not have an assignment for this week, but I did post a little set of review questions. So please make sure you're able to answer those. It's not for a grade, but if you're able to answer those review questions based on this week's information, you should be in good shape. As always, let me know how I can help, and talk to you soon.